the leaders from around the world really on the same page about the crisis we're having, and to get them really committed to doing something about it. So from the very beginning, he announced that for the General Assembly that year, he was going to have a special summit about climate action. And that was set very early on for September 23rd. And everybody was looking forward to that. And then during the entire year leading up to that date, youth action all around the world really picked up, especially under the leadership of Greta Thunberg, Fridays for Future, and other local youth movements. The voice of youth in climate action was getting higher and higher, and to the point that it couldn't be ignored, right? So the United Nations really took this seriously and decided to set the first ever Youth Climate Action Summit before the actual one that's going to happen on Monday. So the Saturday before, they convened hundreds of young youth leaders working on climate from all around the world at the United Nations to actually have their own summit to talk about climate issues and what we young people wanted to see addressed. So many of us on the core team today were part of that meeting. And Aisha and I were also part of a team who set up a special session during that day outside of the main chamber, but open to even more members of the public to share the message. So we were in the Rose Garden and had a tent and had programs throughout the day to talk about it. But at the end of the day, though, at the Youth Climate Action Summit, a lot of us who participated felt a bit shortchanged. We felt that we were more audience than participants. And even though it was very nicely organized and everything, we didn't feel that youth voice really got, voice. So a lot of us following the meeting connected on social media. So we were on WhatsApp, we were on all the social media. We were sharing all the frustration that we were feeling, that even though this was happening, we didn't feel like our voice mattered, right? So the day after, on Sunday, a lot of us around the world started having this idea of like, wait, if they're not going to have a document or something that captures what we want to say, why don't we have our own document? And that idea really caught fire. So it all started with just a Google Doc. We sent around a link and said, hey, anybody who wants to get on this, we're putting together a document to declare really the voice of global youth about climate action. We want to share what we want to see happen, what we want to see our leaders do for our respective countries, right, all around the world. So that went around, and within that night, really, we gathered voices from over 100 different countries, and more than, I think it was 200 or 300 different young people got on there, because people, just logged on and put in their 2 cents and, and shared. Like, we can't keep track of all of the IDs, but for the people who put down their names and their orgs in support of the document, that was already a documented number. So by the next day, and that will be the official day of the Climate Action Summit at the General Assembly in 2019, we had a document together to share, to represent the voices of young people all around the world, to present to global leaders who were convened there, who said that they were going to commit to this, right? So we presented that to them, both, I guess, personally to the ones we had connections with, and also publicly through media. But we felt that that wasn't the end, right? It was a document, we shared it, but hey, what about all the other young people who didn't really get, to work on this because it was so quick, right? We got started on Sunday afternoon, we finished, early Monday morning, we sent it out mid-Monday during the actual summit. So a lot of young people didn't get to have their say yet. So we decided to put together a core team of young people who really wanted to continue working on this document, continue capturing the youth voices all around the world, and really improving the document itself as well. So we decided in the fall of 2019, following the General Assembly, and what a disappointment that was. But anyway, we decided to work more on the document and to include even more voices around the world. So we held inclusive revision sessions through physical and virtual meetings. So we had sessions sort of like this. We had ones on Zoom, we had ones on free conference call, we had physical meetings where groups just sat down together, and we had ones all around the world. So we had ones in New York, we had ones in Salt Lake City, so for the United States, we had ones in Africa, we had ones in Europe, we had ones in Asia. All around the world, young people came in and had their voices heard on this document. They were able to provide feedback into the document and advise on how they think the policy should be formed. So this document really, we felt, by the end of that revision process, really could capture more of the youth activist voice on the climate sphere, right? And it's still a living document, right? Right now, it's in its second year, I guess, but it's spreading, and we're working more to build it. And we'll tell you more about the content in the following slides. But you can be part of it, and that's why we are having this presentation today. So let's tell you a little bit about the content. So our document starts with very strong statements like this. We, the youth, unite in our call for urgent action on the transnational crisis of climate change. It's really important to notice that this is a crisis, much like the COVID crisis, but even more dangerous in some sense, and more dangerous in the sense that it can, one, produce more harm, and two, it's so sneaky because it gets around you. Like, it gets to you without you even noticing, right? The COVID is already really sneaky because it can hide all of its different symptoms and even can spread to people without being symptomatic. And the climate crisis is even worse. And then let's look at our, yes. So why did we decide to do a declaration? Now, there were a couple of different considerations in this, but the primary consideration on the day of was really empowerment, because coming out of the Youth Climate Summit, a lot of young people actually felt disempowered, because even though we were called upon to talk about climate, to really show the youth voice, we didn't feel like we were given the mic on the day. So we wanted this document to show young people that they do have a voice. And then the second reason is that even though young people really widely support climate action, we can see that every Friday, we can see that every day on social media and off, but often we don't know where to begin when we ask for policy reform, right? We can say that, hey, you know, we need action on climate now, but a lot of times when the reporter pushes on and say, so what do you want to see happen? It's really hard for young people to communicate policy. That's why we wanted this to be an easily accessible and shareable toolkit to give young people the voice and give them something concrete that they can actually say, hey, this is what I want, right? So the GYCAD is a climate policy toolkit that people of all ages can use and demand specific climate action from their legislators. Yeah, I'm glad you love this too. So knowledge is power, and we hope that this document can share the knowledge that you'll need to actually get changes and get effects, right? So we'll use this document to talk to our legislators, to share our views, and to push our climate policy and make them reality. All right. And why is this necessary? Because we, the global youth, call upon our heads of states and policymakers at all levels of government to do the following. And my colleague Arpan will tell you about our key policy impact areas.
Thank you so much, Annie, for that. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. So the GYCAD has 77 policy recommendations in total, and they are divided into different subsections. The first one is social, political, and economic drivers. What are the biggest economic drivers behind climate change? And how can we as youth address those in making sure that our governments focus more on blue economy rather than economy that just looks at profits alone? The second subsection is infrastructure, cities, and local action. This mainly focuses on building sustainable cities that make sure that we are taking care of our climates as we're expanding the habitats that we live in. And the third one is where we come in, youth and public mobilization. As we know, that young population are one of the most active populations in climate action. And we have the resources that we can use at our disposal to mobilize and grow this movement even further. The other one is capacity building, making sure that more and more people come in, and education, which is educating them about the real problems that climate change brings, and creating that awareness so that every day we have more and more actions taking place to address the problem of climate change. The other one is nature-based solutions. This is what we should be doing in terms of using nature to solve problems of climate change. For example, using solar energy instead of using gas energy, using more and more disposable items that we have that Mother Nature has blessed us with. And the others are resilience and adaptation, mitigation, which is basically containing this problem, making sure it does not grow more and more serious. We have to act now to ensure that it does not expand more and more. Energy transition, again, is dealing with how can we adapt to more nature-friendly and eco-friendly energy to make sure that we do not do more damage to our resources and our ecosystem. The other ones are industry transition and accountability and climate finance and carbon pricing. Now, my very dear esteemed colleague Nadine will take us through the remainder, where she will tell us how youth can act more and participate more.
Thank you, Annie and Arpin. And so this is really the core of what we want to explore with you guys. So how can young people apply the GYCAD in their local community? And as Annie had said before, this is really a living document. And so our hope for this is that every single year we can open up the GYCAD for more public consultation and have those conversations about, okay, what is missing from this that you guys might have knowledge about that we didn't fully capture. And so we want it to constantly evolve with the times and really be something that everyone can have a stake in. So something you can do that is just pretty immediate and really, really effective is to bring the declaration to local government officials and just have a conversation about the specific policies you'd like to see in your community. So whether that's inviting your local legislators to sign the GYCAD or having them commit to supporting various policy requests from the declaration, it's really, as Annie had said before, a platform for empowerment. So when you say, I want climate action, and they come back with, okay, what do you mean? The GYCAD is designed to be the physical tool that you can take in, slap it on their desk and say, this is what I mean. And so another thing you can do while, of course, we're not meeting in person right now, is send emails to legislators or local policy leaders at all levels, whether it's your town, whether it's your city, whether it's your state. And whether you get a response or not, even getting that on their desk is really, really important. And another thing that you can do is to organize climate advocacy around specific policies coordinated with other youth across the state. So organizations like yours are really, really cool because you're working with people from across New Jersey to make climate action something that's a little more tangible and really coordinating your efforts. So that's critical. And this is something that if you were to compile a list of local legislators perhaps and distribute that at all your schools and say, here's a template that, that we'd like you to follow when you call your legislators. Say, hi, I am Nadine. I'm calling because I want to have you look at the Global Youth Climate Action Declaration at, say, infrastructure in local cities. There's some policies in here that I think we could really implement locally. And that ends up being a really potent way to just get a conversation going and have that ongoing dialogue with your leaders. Another great thing that you can do with the GYCAD is integrate it into your academic curriculum. So for K through 12 schools, you can ask your teachers, principal, superintendent to consider integrating it into your academic curriculum. This works really great in science or in social studies courses. Specifically, I know my little sister is taking AP environmental science. So I think that that's a really, really great place to say, hey, I'd love for you to, integrate this document into your course. And maybe we can talk about carbon, and we can talk about, okay, what are the policies we need to really offset the harmful impacts of carbon. And so, yeah, requesting that your school teaches about sustainability in the classroom is really a great thing to do, because the more education, the more awareness, the more kids grow up and decide, hey, whatever I do in the world, I want to make sure that it has positive implications for the environment. And for college, university, or postgraduate education, you can ask your school administrators and board of trustees to add classes about sustainability, just to ensure that all students, regardless of major, have exposure to sustainable development. I know me personally, when I went to Lehigh University, I did my minor in sustainable development, and that course brought in students from the business school, brought in students from engineering, from arts and science, and we all had these dynamic conversations about, okay, how does sustainable development, which is an intersection of environmental well-being, social well-being, and economic well-being, how does that relate to how we do business? How does that relate to how we engineer things? How does that relate to how we create policy? So something that would be awesome is if you can advocate at your institutions for sustainable development to be something that is a core course that every single student gets exposure to. Outside of that, really cool things to do are hosting events at your school that are focused on implementation of the GYCAD within your campus community and in the surrounding area as well. I know at Lehigh, again, we had one of the revision meetings. So when we were going in and editing the document again, we had an event at Lehigh where we brought in different stakeholders from both the community and from the university, and had a discussion about, okay, which policies are relevant here, and how can we really actualize them and make sure that this is something that's on the agenda of local policy makers. And another great thing in the same vein as that is hosting a strategic action and implementation meeting. So pick a couple policies you'd like to see implemented in your community. This is best done if you get like a workshop size room of people and just go through the document and say, okay, what stands out to you? What section do you want to tackle? And then people will kind of go for what's interesting to them. And pick specific policies. And so there's this policy method called social context mapping that was actually created by a Yale professor, Susan Clark. And that has become my favorite way of thinking about the GYCAD. So what the social context mapping theory does is it asks you to think about who are the stakeholders and who are the affected individuals and groups within your community. So what policies or lack of policies are in place surrounding this specific issue? And my favorite aspect of it, it really asks you to investigate power dynamics in that place. So where is power concentrated? Who has it? Who doesn't is a really key question. And what are the values and perspectives of the various stakeholders, whether they have power or not in this instance, and how can you make this policy issue relatable to them, and how can you get this to best flow into your community without it being something that doesn't kind of come up organically. And most importantly, how can we engage marginalized participants and affected populations in the policy process? So ensuring that no voices are left out of the conversation, and that people are really getting the chance to have some self-determination when it comes to the well-being of their environment. And there's a term I came across in one of my policy classes, and that is a multi-log. So instead of a dialogue just between two people, having a multi-log is a great way to have a conversation between various stakeholders and affected individuals and communities about how you can actualize change in a local context. So really understanding what companies are working on. Let's say we're doing something with renewable energy. So what renewable energy companies are operational in this area? Okay, what non-renewable energy companies are operational in this area? Which politicians are getting paid by them? And really understanding who's impacted. Say you have a drilling site, who's impacted by that drilling site? What populations are most vulnerable from harmful environmental exposures? So all of that is something that, when asking for policy change, is a really great way of getting it to be sustainable and to best meet the needs of all members of the community. And so that being said, we'd like to share with you a little sneak peek of our Localizing Climate Action Conference. We are working right now with the former mayor of Salt Lake City, Jackie Biskupski, to put together a global virtual conference that's slated for late September. And it'll be focused on actualizing climate goals in local government. We are bringing in mayors from around the globe, youth climate activists, just different specialists focused in different areas of the GYCAD. So the conference is going to be themed around those different key impact areas that Arpan had shared with us earlier. And so, yeah, it'll be a great event, and we hope that we can follow up with you guys to make sure you can participate in that as well. So stay tuned to our social media pages for further information. And here are some of our handles. Definitely, I think the most important thing to do on here is sign the declaration. So if you go to gycad.org and you sign the declaration, that'll get your name on there, along with thousands of other young people from around the world. And subscribe to our e-newsletter so that you can stay tuned with what we're doing. And lastly, we will be announcing this at the end of the Climate Action Conference, but we're creating a national and community ambassadors program. So if that's something that interests you, we'll be kind of mobilizing that by the end of September. So if you're interested in that potentially, that like rb.gui thing, that is a shorter link to a Google form. And so if you fill out the Google form, we'll know that you're potentially interested, and then we can keep in touch about that. So thank you all for being with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to Aishu so we can do some Q&A, because we'd love to hear from you guys.
Thank you very much to Nadine, Arpan, and Annie for the presentation. And my name is Aisha Narasimha. I'm also part of the GYCAD core team. And we are definitely looking forward to hearing from you. We would like to hear your input. If you have any questions about the actual document itself, if you believe that there are any additions that should be made, please do feel free to share with us. Now, if you do have any questions, please feel free to click on raise hand or under the, if you see the participant list, raise hand icon to your right side, and we will go in order of the hands being. So type any questions or comments in the chat box. So yes, the floor is open to all of you. Do you have any questions or comments? And please feel free to even unmute. We see many people are very interested, so thank you very much for your interest, sharing your enthusiasm. Now, Joanna, since you have been also taking a lot of initiatives, how do you think, you know, our team and this document can help further in your efforts in combating the effects of climate change?
Yeah, I think that, like Nadine was saying, I think that there's a lot of potential for this group to go to their specific legislators that represent them, depending on, you know, what part of the declaration And I just want to make sure everyone knows afterwards, we'll send out a follow-up email that will include the PDF of the declaration so people can go through that, as well as all the other links that were shared. So yeah, I think that's definitely like the best route I can see, to have, you know, the actual policies laid out for everyone to be able to, you know, connect with their legislators in that way.
Thank you. Absolutely. And actually, you know, when the you know, some of the drafters of the document, when we were all come together, the focus was actually on governance. And as Annie had mentioned, the people had come together. The call actually to partake in this endeavor was through like a WhatsApp group that was created for all the youth attendees at the Youth Climate Action Summit. So it was actually from that that came out and throughout the networks. And, you know, definitely many of us were delighted to take it forward. So, so this is also absolutely focusing more at, yes, governments and, you know, various stakeholders. Now, the thing is that it, you know, there was also the United Nations Civil Society Conference, as Nadine had mentioned. The former mayor of Salt Lake City in Utah is going to be involved in the endeavor that will partake in the local climate action conference, Localizing Climate Action Conference. I beg your pardon. Now, the conference that was, there was the United Nations Society Conference in Salt Lake City last year, and former Mayor Biskupski is was the host of the conference, and the youth who were involved in the planning process of that conference facilitated a dialogue with youth all around the world in formulating the Youth Climate Comment that's focused on individual actions. So you can say that the GYCAD is a continuation of that, focusing to other actors. And, you know, thank you very much to Swan Fridur for also sharing your thoughts as to how this can also work with students. And absolutely, this is just to amplify what's been going on. Any questions, please feel free. Swan Fridur, if you feel to share any comments or thoughts to expand on what you see in the chat box, feel free to do so. Please don't hesitate to ask us any questions. We want to hear from you.
Yeah, also feel free to just like turn your mics on and speak. There's a small amount of us, so that works just great too.
Absolutely, and we understand, you know, the document was just presented to you and it will take a while to go to, but yes, absolutely, we always are looking forward to hearing from you. And Margaret, thank you very much for your question. And your question is, if the policies in the GYCAD are focused on climate change or on other issues as well. Would any member of the team like to answer? Arpan, Annie, or Nadine? Would any of you like to answer?
Sure. So yes, they all are on climate change, but it's on specific aspects of climate change. And the thing that I love about it is that it actually does tap in to most of the 16 other sustainable development goals. So just because it's focused on climate doesn't mean it's not intersectional. And so we make sure to include stuff about inequalities, and there's a lot on even how gender is impacted by climate and the disproportionate impact on women around the world. And what other stuff is in there? Like different supply chains. And so how there's a lot about how to really reshape society in order to best move forward. So it is very, very integrated, if that's helpful.
Yeah, just as climate is an intersectional issue, so is the document. So definitely it lends to all different kinds of areas, but all the policies do lead back to climate, as it is a climate action declaration.
Yes, thank you very much, Nadine and Annie, for your response. And thank you, Chimay. Absolutely. You know, climate change, of course, it is connected to the other sustainable development goals. And, going back to one point that Nadine brings up, gender, that is another aspect, because a lot of people may not know the connection between climate change and gender. So absolutely, just showing that there are various dimensions to the climate change crisis. Thank you very much. And Tiffany, thank you very much for your question. Yes. So how many signatures does the declaration have so far? And we have 1,613 signatures on the public count, as Annie had shared. And yes, if you do visit the website, as Nadine kindly shared in the chat box, that's gycad.org. Once again, www.gycad.org, you will be able to see the signatures, and we want to make the information as open as possible, so for transparency. And thank you very much, Swan Fridu, for your next question. How applicable would you say some of these policies or other ideas are to smaller governments, such as county and state legislatures? Because many local leaders are quick to dismiss requests for climate change, labeling it as a global problem and requests as national actions. Excellent question. Thank you very much. Would any of the core team members like to take this question?
That's a great question because as we introduced, the declaration was at first meant to be delivered to national leaders at the Climate Action Summit in the United Nations, right? So for the revision process last fall, that was exactly one of the points we looked at specifically, how to make it more applicable to local areas. And so a lot of the policies that are currently in the document are very much applicable. And really, like, climate change is a global issue, but there are a lot of things that we must do locally. And a lot of the issues are local too. Because, for example, for some issues of environmental racism, right, like how different areas in your town are differently impacted because of placements of where you, I don't know, put trash incinerators, where you put recycling stations, that's all locally impacting, right? So you really need to look at the issues that are locally applicable, and then choose the policies that will make the most sense for your area and that will galvanize the most support. And that's also why we're having the Localizing Climate Action Conference this September too, to really make sure that people know how to take grander policies and visions and make it down to earth and communicate it directly with their local legislators and make sure that they know that this is actually something that people want them to be looking at and not something they can throw over to the national government.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that, it's really, I think even though we created this for the global context, as we were editing, it became really abundantly clear that the most powerful impact it could have is on the local level. Because if you think about environmental challenges, what is the global environment other than a bunch of smaller ecosystems? And so there's not just environmental ecosystems you have to consider, but there's also the social and political ecosystems. And I think with climate action, it's unique because it is, as we say in our preamble, it's a transnational crisis. So climate change doesn't care where you draw your borders, but it really impacts all of us, and it doesn't impact us equally because, right, there's areas of the world like small island developing states, they really are bearing a lot of the burden of climate change, but they don't have a lot of the climate impact. So their approach to climate change is going to be much different than a country like the United States or China or Russia. And it's even more powerful when you take it to the community level and you say, okay, what are we doing as a small social ecosystem that's unsustainable, and how can we understand the social context, like with social context mapping, how can we understand that to best inform policy change? So I would encourage you all to actually bring this as local as possible, because often it's much easier to accomplish big policies at a local level. As we see with our current federal government, it's really hard to get anything done. So cities and counties and states are really where the magic happens at this point.
Thank you very much, Annie and Nadine, for your responses. And Swanfried, thank you very much for your question. We do hope that we were able to answer it. And thank you for sharing your perspectives. And we see that local equity and environmental justice are some of the greatest concerns in your community. So yes, thank you very much, of course. So hopefully the document will help further efforts in having that equity, creating that equity. On to our next question. Margaret, thank you for your question. Are there different policies for developing countries versus developed countries in the declaration? Nadine, Annie, or Arpan, would any of you like to take this question? Yes, Annie, the floor is yours.
Sure. Yes, that's a great question. And that's also a concern that was raised during our revision process. A lot of people were really concerned about holding the same standards across the board. So we see this document as sort of a toolkit, right? So you bring appropriate policies that are suitable for your area to your legislators. So you can pick the ones that are most applicable, and you can also adjust like the demands in terms of the numbers if that's more meaningful to your area. And also there are policies in there that specifically holds developing countries at a, like there's one policy that says we should allocate special funds to developing countries for this. Let me pull it up and put it into the chat for you.
Thank you very much, Annie, for your response. And to Margaret once again, and we will hopefully answer your question. Does anybody else have any other question, comments? Please feel free to present your perspectives or ask anything you wish right away. Just you can. Yes, Karina, please go ahead with your question.
Hi guys, my name is Karina, and I'm new to this the climate the United Nations the civil society conference that you were discussing and the climate compact. But I was just curious, for the conference for the Salt Lake City, the Utah one, will there be other countries involved, I guess, or like other like global, sorry, my words are bad today, global climate coalition, just other organizations from other countries as well, besides like the US having like a lot of their own sustainability programs, just out of curiosity?
Yes, so there will definitely be many mayors represented from all over the world, and we're going to be discussing climate in a global context, but bringing it to the local level. So talking about different case studies in whether it's cities, towns, or states. So we're really shooting to make this something that is as inclusive as possible. It's actually happening over the course of 2 days, and is in the morning Eastern time, so that we can be as inclusive of other time zones as we can be. So we're hoping that we draw a lot of people from all over the world. And we co-sponsored an event, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago at this point. And on the RSVP for that, we actually had responses from over 60 countries. So this, I think, will be able to draw even more, which is super exciting to think about. And yeah, so we would love to have as many of you as possible come and attend that event, because I think it'll end up being really fantastic.
Yeah, and just to clarify a little, so we mentioned quite a few different events, but the ones that's happening in the future, this September, the Localizing Climate Action Conference, that's a virtual global conference, right? So it's meant to invite young people and older people, anybody who's interested in climate action, plus global mayors to talk about these issues together. So that is a really global event, and it's designed to be like that. And the two other ones we mentioned before, one is the main United Nations General Assembly event, right, the Climate Action Summit. And the other one we mentioned, the one that yielded the Youth Climate Compact, which is a separate document, which is also awesome because Aisha and I were also involved in drafting that. But that document came out of the United Nations Civil Society Conference, which is a more comprehensive conference. It talks about the entire civil society and all its issues. But for the youth declaration for that conference, we decided to focus on climate this time around. So that's where that document was and that was the conference that took place actually in Salt Lake City physically. So just to clarify the different ones, just in case anybody got confused between the different conferences.
Yes, Nadine, the floor is yours.
I was actually just going to say, to the question that was just posed, will all new information about these events be available on social media? Yes. So we're going to have lots of promo leading up to the conference itself. And something that we were talking about doing is potentially having a forum on Facebook where you can actually have an ongoing discussion either every week or every 2 weeks about different components of the GYCAD. So we want to make this engaging, especially leading up to it, and then have tangible action come out of it. And of course, that's inclusive of any young people or even older people who want to join in on the discourse. So yeah, everything will come out. The best way to get information is by actually signing the declaration, because then you will be enrolled in our newsletter, and that'll come in through email. So that, and I would say Instagram and Facebook are going to be the best ways to get updated information. And I can tab back to our social media on the slides.
Thank you very much, Karina, for your questions. And as Nadine mentioned, yes, it's anybody can join us. And that's the purpose of the conference, the virtual conference that is forthcoming. It's accessible it's open to everybody. And thank you very much to Annie and Nadine for your responses. Our next question is from Margaret. She would like to know, what are some recommendations when speaking to local government leaders who are more Republican, and how will it affect them and the policies that they support? Nadine, would you like to take this question?
Great question. And I think that that's really, it's great that you want to reach across the aisle. I know it can be tough sometimes, especially when some people don't believe in evolution, which is a challenge, right? So I would say something that we talked about in my environmental policy courses was the issue of framing. So thinking about how can you present this to your policymaker in a way that's going to resonate with them? How can you present it to a community that may not conventionally say like rah, rah climate action? So I find that with Republicans, something that actually works well as an argument is national security, because they love national security. And so you can say it's climate is a threat to our security, whether it's, you know, the Navy's actually really worried about it here, because if there is sea level rise, a lot of their naval bases are going to be just completely underwater. And so it's a threat to the coasts and all the people that live there. So like, think about Miami. If we have more sea level rise, like goodbye Miami. And also if there are a lot of people who tend to not want an influx of refugees, which I find really unfortunate, because I think that as a country that is the largest contributor to climate change, we should really be, you know, taking on, when there are eventually climate refugees that unfortunately we're seeing is going to be the case. There is a lot of xenophobia in this country when it comes to refugees, and I think that framing it in terms of national security just allows you to say like, okay, so if you're really like not for taking more people in, you can prevent doing that by taking climate actions in order to, you know, reverse the course of climate change. And that way we won't have to take in as many climate refugees, which is not like, is not ideal, but it's a way to get it through to them. And another way is by really drawing the links between climate action and the economy. So how is climate action something that is in the long term good for the economy? And there's all sorts of data, and I would encourage you to look up stuff about circular economy and donut economics. It's basically it explores the notion of sustainability being actually environmentally good as well. And obviously it stretches beyond GDP, but it's, yeah, long story short, I'd say framing is going to be your best friend in terms of talking to government leaders who just may not usually be supportive.
And also, we don't really need to enter the conversation and make it combative either, because the bottom line, climate action is about really survival too, right? It's a life or death matter. It's not really like we support climate action because we're Democrat or whatever, right? It's really about how to protect our community better. It's about how to build our community better. It's about what makes sense, right? If we keep on living the way that we are, you know, whether you are a Democrat or Republican or independent or whatever you are, the earth cannot sustain, right? So it's about talking common sense and just shackling from the whole politics, really making local policy local, right? And talking about what would make sense for your community. So really about whether or not, for example, we should ban fracking in our town, right? It's polluting all the water. So when you turn on the faucet, it burns, right? So that obviously doesn't make sense whichever like side you stand on politics. So really make it a matter of where like constituents would get affected, and just make it not really about politics, because you don't really want to play with party politics, and you don't want them to think it's about party politics either.
That is such a great point, Annie. And I think to add on to that, it's really powerful if you can just share this with your local communities beyond just your legislators. So get the people who vote legislators into office to be aware of how does environmental justice play a role in our community, which communities are systematically disadvantaged when it comes to environmental health outcomes. So where are the pockets with higher rates of respiratory illnesses, or where are the pockets with higher rates of cancers, and how does that relate into different like ambient air pollution from either traffic or from local industrial sites. And so I think really make sure you're doing kind of a two-pronged thing where you're communicating with legislators, but you're also communicating with the voter base, and ensuring that everyone is really aware of, hey, like, I know climate change is talked about at the global level, but here's how it's relevant to us at home. And that's where I would encourage all of you to go and host a local meeting about the local context for your community and just have that discussion. So that would be, I think, the best thing you can do on that front.
Thank you very much for the question, Margaret, and to Annie and Nadine for the responses. And just highlighting a point, Nadine, you brought up, you know, when going to climate change advocacy, some of you may have noticed as well that you also have to speak, you know, in the language that people understand, so that relate, so they can relate to it. So, you know, that's maybe an issue some of us have faced, you know, in advocacy efforts, not just for climate change, but for any cause. And I think that's one of the most important things. You want to make sure people understand. If you have jargon that's very difficult for people to, that makes it difficult to grasp the concepts, then you're actually defeating the purpose. So absolutely. So it's speaking it in a way that everybody understands. It's having that relatability. Absolutely. So thank you for highlighting that. And just also going back to one point Anne made, absolutely, this is an apolitical issue, climate change. This is, you know, the future of the earth and, you know, all beings. So absolutely. And, you know, that also similar to the coronavirus as well. You know, as you can see that speaking within the American context, you know, trying to reinforce to people that it is an apolitical issue, it'll affect anyone. So absolutely, we should look at this as a, you know, as humanity coming together. So thank you very much. Does anybody have any other questions or any other comments they would like to share? Please feel free to. maybe in the next few minutes we can conclude our conversation, but please feel free to say anything in which, if you feel we're missing something, kindly share your thoughts. Yes, please. Annie, thank you very much. You had mentioned in the chat box one specific policy proposal to help developing countries um, is to allocate specific funds to the developing states for their own research program. Absolutely. So this again goes to climate finance as well. And some of you may have done a lot of work in climate finance, and most certainly you would also be able to advise what would be some ideal solutions in raising generating these funds, and even domestic resource mobilizations. Perhaps some of you may know that also contributes to climate finance. Absolutely. Does anybody have any other comments, questions? Does anybody want to share any of the work they've been doing? Arpan, yes, the floor is yours.
Oh no, so I was just going to add something to Margaret's point about how to speak to Republicans. I think it's hard to reason with Republicans. I've been there. The best solution is vote them out whenever you can, because the biggest power is not with the politicians, it's with the people. We have to empower our communities to make sure that we're taking climate actions at a local level, to make sure that people are speaking out whenever they can. Because for the first time in 6 years that I've been at Jersey City, this will be the first time where we will have a question about sustainability and climate change on the ballot when we go to vote for our mayor. And this was only possible because people were constantly making sure that people that we have elected are able to take actions, and not just words, meaningful actions that actually bring some change that we really need.
Thank you very much, Arpan. And that's quite impressive. It's very interesting to learn about that fact. So thank you very much. Absolutely. And persistence pays off. We do have one more question from Margaret. Thank you very much. Do UICAD have any policies about deforestation, about carbon absorption, and going beyond carbon and fossil fuels? Nadine, would you like to answer the question?
Sure. We have a whole section on nature-based solutions, and it actually goes into regenerative agriculture and how, by planting more trees and ensuring that you're not just going and planting trees that aren't native to the area, but you're working with the local ecosystem to ensure that it will be sustained. And we do also focus a lot on the REDD+, which is, I forget what that acronym stands for exactly, but it does have to do with deforestation. And so there are a few points woven throughout the document. And again, we'll make sure that we get a copy to you guys, and it's available online as well. And I see that there's a nuclear question. Does the declaration discuss alternative energy sources, specifically nuclear, and implementing them? I don't recall if nuclear specifically is mentioned. I don't know if any of the other core team members have the declaration in front of them right now. I don't, because I'm sharing my screen. Yeah, I don't recall, but we do cover alternative energy. We have a whole section on energy transition.
Yes, we don't mention nuclear particularly in energy transition, but we do, like, if you do have a stance on nuclear, we'd be happy to discuss that with you. And in terms of deforestation, we actually have a policy that calls upon the condemnation and banning of all extractive practices without local consent. So that kind of also speaks to that and also expands it.
Thank you, Richard. Question. And Tiffany, we apologize for not answering your question earlier. And thank you very much and to Nola and Molly for bringing it up as well. So yes, absolutely. And thank you. Your feedback also helps a lot. So if we are missing any points, please feel free again to contact us via the respective channels seen on the screen and through the website. We definitely want this, document to ultimately want to reflect the voices of everyone as a whole, on a collective basis. So, we really do appreciate your feedback. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any more questions? Maybe we have time for 1 to 2 more questions. Nadine, yes, I apologize. The floor is yours.
Oh, I was just going to say, I had seen that Nolan had unmuted. So if you wanted to say something, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you guys already talked about like how you make decisions on editing the document. And if you haven't, just to specify that.
Yeah. So what we had done before was a consultative process. So we brought the document to all these different, like there were some in person. As Annie had said earlier, we did, I think it ended up being on 4 different continents. So we had public consultation meetings that went through meticulously every single point in the document, and just had a discussion and debate about it, and then suggested new ones. And we had each of the consultations, so whether it was online or in person, we had them submit what their thoughts and revisions were. And then we all painstakingly went through and amongst the core team had discussions about what should be implemented and how we can go about, integrating that within the framework of the document. And so we felt that that was the best process in terms of making sure everyone's voice could be heard, but also that we weren't just opening the document completely and people could insert like completely random thoughts that were unrelated to climate. So we wanted there to be like a screening process. And it took a while for us to really go through. We were very, very meticulous and ensured that we had a majority of the core team vote yes or no to approve changes. So we really went in and debated all 77 lines and consolidated them. It was a long process, but one that we're hoping to repeat every single year.
Yeah, and it's actually a very enlightening and fun process too, I feel, and also very interactive. So for some of the points that were raised in earlier consultations, we will also share the recommendations in later ones and see if, more people echoed with those suggestions. And it was really, we felt a groundswell of support for new recommendations, like those would tend to get more support to be voted in, right? And if there was one person who really felt that something should be done, but nobody else does, and actually everybody else was against it, then yeah, it kind of doesn't get in. But we really try to make it a very fair and democratic process. And we hope to, like Nadine said, do it again this fall. So hope all of you will be part of that and, help us build that as well.
Cool, thanks.
And again, just to reiterate, all of you guys, like, fully anoint yourselves as community ambassadors of this. The intention with the GYCAD is that it's not owned by us on the core team. It's really a living, breathing document that is owned by just youth in common. So we'd love for you to take this in as your own and bring it to your legislators or bring it into your community. It is your platform to stand on. So, and that being said, when the consultative process opens again, we would love to hear your feedback on what it is you'd hope to add or revise.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much to Annie, Nolan, and Nadine for your questions and responses. We do have one more question from Swanfridur. Yes, the e-news, if you are if you sign the declaration, are you automatically subscribe to the e-newsletter? As Annie mentioned, there is a box that you can take to subscribe at the bottom when you enter your contact information, and you have the option of unsubscribing at any time you wish. So we definitely want to cater to everybody's needs to ensure that you have access to all the information. Definitely. Does anybody have any more questions? Final questions, comments, responses? Please feel free to share Any views, anecdotes for your climate change advocacy, or anything you feel is relevant to our discussion today? Margaret, thank you very much for your questions. How does implementation work? Do we just choose the ones that we feel impact us locally? What is a good number of policies to propose? So what would be the suggested strategy? Nadine, Arpan, or Annie, would any of you like to answer the questions? Question or questions?
Sure. So the implementation process is really up to you and your legislators, and your fellow community members. And yes, so you do choose the policies that you feel resonate most with you and your community. Maybe pick some that you think are more attainable in the short term, and then some that maybe are long-term aspirational goals for your community. In terms of a good number of policies to propose, it really just depends on the legislator. It's even if you get 3 policies in front of them, that's awesome. But the ideal thing is to just get as many as possible in front of them and to get them to be signatories. Because if a legislator is signing on to something, they are probably themselves or having a member of their staff really look through it. So I would say start between like 3 and 10, just like if you're having a sort of local meeting about it, to make sure you can really dive in to that social context and explore what are the different ways that we can actualize this policy in our community.
Yes, definitely. The actual implementation strategy is definitely very local and specific to your area. So once you build a team of people who really want to work on this, you should definitely, figure out which ones are immediately applicable, right? And pick those and present those as the lead policies to present. And then you still have the whole document in the background to support you and say that, hey, these come from a document that is internationally, echoed by youth worldwide. And that gives you more, backbone when you have like all of these other young people, and it's not just you guys here in your town saying this, but it's something that everybody else is also saying and doing, right? So that gives you really legitimacy. But definitely pick the ones that are locally applicable, and probably if you want to go in and have something activated like immediately, you should pick ones that are more closely related, and the ones that the particular legislator that you're talking about can actually put it in local law to effect.
Absolutely, thank you. And Arpan, would you like to add any comments?
No, I would just say, and also just contacting as many legislators as you can is always a good thing, because you can recommend 1, 2, 3 policies to one legislature and the other to the other ones. For example, for Jersey City, I know carbon output is a big issue given the amount of cars that we have. So what we are doing with a couple of youth in Jersey City is making sure that the mayor and some of the lawmakers are able to sign not a law, but just sort of a declaration that says there should be as many or double the amount of trees as there is population in the entire state of New Jersey, because the one thing that we can use to fight the carbon output is by planting more trees to make sure that our cities are a bit more sustainable and more eco-friendly.
Thank you very much to Margaret and all the Nadine and Arpan for your question responses. And thank you for everyone who's been joining us. And if you do have to leave earlier, please do feel free. We do understand you have other commitments, but I think maybe we can conclude our discussion. Does anybody have any last questions or comments? Anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, and I just also want to mention that if you do go to our social media right now, it may seem a little spare, but that's only because over the past few months, we were working with a communications team to try to rebrand. So our new communication strategy hasn't been implemented and out yet. So please bear with us while, it seems like we're not doing much on the social media front, but all the work is going on in the back end. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us directly through either the social media handles you see or through any of our public communications channels, or if you want, you can contact us directly and we'll be happy to chat with you about all these different issues.
Yes, thank you, Edge. And now I pass the floor back to the to my esteemed colleagues. Do you have any last comments you'd like to share with our audience?
I would just like to thank you all for being here, and thank you for your work in New Jersey and your work on climate. I think it's really, really powerful when young people can get engaged in climate advocacy, especially at the local level, because the more legislators see that young people are active, the more that they start to take us seriously as important members of their constituency. So thank you all for your work. Keep going. I know it can be frustrating at times, but we hope that this is just the beginning of an ongoing conversation with you. And please feel free to stay in touch. And yeah, be well and be healthy through the rest of all this crazy COVID stuff. And yeah, if anyone has anything else to say, go for it. And then I think we can pass it back to Joanna.
I just also wanted to thank everyone as well. Thank you very much to Jana and her team for providing us the opportunity to speak today. And thank you to everybody for joining us. We really are inspired by all the work that you do, and definitely we are optimistic that we do have a bright future ahead of us. And as Nadine mentioned, please do stay well during these unprecedented times. We hope that you are keeping healthy, and definitely we look forward to collaborating with you in the future. And I pass it back to Arpan, if you'd like to say anything, or to Joanna as well.
I definitely just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and a big thank you to Joanna for giving us the opportunity to present this amazing declaration for the state of New Jersey. And definitely a big thank you to everyone who joined us. It's been an amazing getting to know everyone and just talking about this in a very detailed way. And I look forward to collaborating with all of you in the future in our upcoming projects, definitely. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to Joanna as well.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. That was amazing, and we look forward to working with you in the future. I just want to remind everyone, if you're in the coalition, I will send out a coalition-wide follow-up email with all the information that we got today. If you're not in the coalition but you signed up, I will be sending that information as well. And then if for some reason you're not in the coalition and you haven't signed up, please email me so I can send the recording and all this information to you as well. Yeah, so I don't want to keep anybody any longer, but we'll definitely continue these conversations. And I thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you all so much for coming. And really, all of us working in this are sources of inspiration for us to carry on this work.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Thank you to everyone. Stay well.